Hey guys, if this is your first time to my channel, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily and today I'm going to be walking you through all of my favorite colorful eyeshadows. Is there lipstick on my teeth? God, I hope not. You always take a gamble whenever you wear a glossy lip. Never know where it's gonna end up. So today I'm gonna be taking you guys through my very favorite single colorful eyeshadows. Now I will be doing a video like this on my very favorite neutral and more tamed down eyeshadows, but if you have been on my channel for more than like 2 videos, then I am sure that you already know that I do not mess with neutrals very often and I am more of a colorful, pinky, purpley kind of girl. So with that being said, I had a couple of requests to show you guys what my favorite single eyeshadows are, and I figured that I would put together a little Z palette here of just some of my standout shades that I have in my collection. So with that being said, some of these shadows I have talked about before on my channel, and some of them I have not even mentioned once. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right on into my very favorite colorful single eyeshadows that I own. So the first colorful single shadow that I have over here is Capri by Devinah, and I have talked about this one on my channel before, but it is just the most beautiful matte canary yellow shade. It's perfect for starting out a warm toned orangey look in the crease. It's perfect for just blending out in the crease and tapping a little on the lid and having a nice one eyeshadow colorful eye look. It's just absolutely gorgeous. It's a little bit more pastel than some of the other yellows that I have in my collection, and I just really love it. I think it shows up really nicely on the skin. I don't have to work with it very hard to get it to show up, and I think it's just a really beautiful shadow. I think that Devinah really knows how to do their colorful mattes right, and I could not live without this eyeshadow in my collection. Okay, maybe I could live, but I would be a very, very unhappy person, okay? Because I need this shadow in my life. The second eyeshadow that I have in the little Z palette that I put together here is Sydney Grace's Sunbeam. This one is a little bit more new to my collection. I've had it for, I'd say about a month now, but I've been using it pretty often when I do a yellow look. Now this is a shimmery yellow shade, but it's very, very... Oh my god, we almost had a monstrosity on our hands here, but I saved the day. It's okay. Everything is still in place, so let's move on, shall we? But like I was saying, Sunbeam by Sydney Grace is a shimmery yellow shade, but once you actually get it into the crease and start blending it out, it does work as a pretty nice crease color. It's a bit deeper in tone than Capri by Devinah is, and it's really, really bright and punchy off of first application. So you really don't have to build this shade up very much, and it's the most bright yellow that I have in my collection, believe it or not, even compared to a very familiar face to a lot of people down here, which is Sugarpill's Butter Cupcake, but we'll get back to that later. But to me, this is one of the brightest yellows that I have in my collection, and I think the reason why it's so bright is because it is a shimmery shadow. It's not just a flat matte, and from what I've heard and from what I've kind of gathered from watching YouTube and whatnot, I've heard that these lighter kind of colorful mattes are a lot harder to formulate and to really get right and to get pigmented and blendable. So I think that this being a shimmer shade really helps it to be really bright and very pigmented, but it still really does work as a crease shade if that's what you want to use it for, and it's an absolutely beautiful lid shade as well. And if you pack it on the lid, it's not going to be super, super bright because it is kind of a more subdued shimmer, but I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and I think it works really, really well with a lot of the tones that I typically go for. So moving right along here, the next shade that I have to show you guys is Colourpop's Centerfold. Now I'm not sure if this one is still in stock or not, because I checked on the website a couple times and it looks like it might not be, but I have to mention it because it's absolutely gorgeous and it's one of my favorite shades. But I just have to mention it because I use it all the freaking time. There's a pretty big dent in it, I'm sure that you can see there, but this is a really kind of light peachy orange. I almost always use this as a crease shade because it just works out really well for me and for the types of eye looks that I like to do. I think it's an absolutely beautiful color, and I feel like it's a color that's kind of hard to come by. Now granted, we do have a bunch of warm tones and warm peachy tones and peachy corals and whatnot on the market, but this one is just very, very neon, and you'll see that in the swatches, but it's pretty neon-esque. But I do feel like it is a pretty unique shadow despite it being of the same color family of a lot of the typical shadows that we see. So as you can tell, we're getting into the more corally aspect of my favorite colorful shadows. So some of these you definitely have heard of if you've seen my channel before. So I'm sorry if it's a little repetitive, but you know me, I just cannot leave out my corals. They're my favorite colors to use and I have to mention them, and if you've never really seen my channel before or any videos of mine, then this might be some new information to you. So the next shade that I am thoroughly impressed with and really do enjoy using is the shade Spring Break by Karity. This one is a bit newer to my collection as well. I've only had it for about a month, but I've reached for it about 1,000,000 times. Okay, that's definitely an over-dramatization, but I've reached for it a hell of a lot when I'm doing my makeup, especially when I'm doing looks like today where I'm doing more kind of smoky berry shades, and when I use corals, I love to pair this shade with my deeper corals. It's a lot more bright than some of the deeper corals that I have in my collection, and I really enjoy it. It's very similar to a lot of the colors that you see here and a lot of the colors that are coming up, but I really enjoy it. I think it's a nice color, and I thought that it was definitely worth mentioning. So next up is a very well-known and talked about shadow on my channel here, and this is Colourpop's Slim Fit. Now I know, you've heard me talk about this about 1,002 times, but I have to mention it because I use it all the freaking time. It is super pigmented, super beautiful, very blendable. It is a pressed pigment from Colourpop, but there is not a lot of fallout with it, and I really, really do enjoy this shade. And if you're into corals and you have not picked up Slim Fit by Colourpop, what are you doing, girl or boy? Because it is absolutely stunning, and it is one of my favorite shades in my entire collection. So continuing on here with the more kind of corally orange theme, I have Poppy by Makeup Geek. Now I'm sure the shadow needs no introduction, but it is a very, very kind of bright poppy orangey coral shade. Poppy is a little bit more orangey toned than some of the other corals that I've talked about, and it's definitely a little bit deeper as well. It really does kind of replicate what a poppy flower looks like, and I think it's one of Makeup Geek's best shadows. Now, the two Makeup Geek shadows that I have in this palette that I'm going to talk about are, in my opinion, her two best shades. So if you're into colorful makeup and you want to try out Makeup Geek, these are some good options here, I'm telling you. Here we have some finger swatches of the first row of the Z palette. This is on unprimed skin, and I dipped into the shadow 2 times and did 2 swatches on top of each other to show the pigment. Now we have some brush swatches on unprimed skin as well. So now we are moving on to the second row here, and we are going to talk about the first foiled shade in the palette so far, and that is Golden Peach by Sydney Grace Cosmetics. This shade is absolutely beautiful if you are into warm tones. If you are into oranges and peaches and corals and even yellows, granted even red, I mean honestly you could pair this with anything, but Golden Peach is this beautiful pressed pigment that has a more corally orangey pinky base, and it has this beautiful golden sheen throughout the eyeshadow that you really see on the eyes. It's very vibrant, very intense, and I absolutely love the pressed pigment formula from Sydney Grace. I am very impressed with some of the shadows that I've tried from them, and it's a really beautiful color. It's very vibrant, very out there, and I think it works with all of the tones that I have going on in this palette. I promise, I am almost done talking about all of the coral eyeshadows that I have in this palette, and I'll finally show off something else other than coral. But bear with me here, I have one more to talk about, and that is Sura by Devinah. Now I have talked about this about 1,002 times on this channel as well, so it's probably no new name to you guys, but it's a beautiful, deeper coral shade. It's very pigmented, really blendable, has a little bit of fallout because it's so pigmented, and I will take the fallout because of how pigmented this shadow is and how easy it is to blend and how colorful it is. I'll take that fallout. I don't mind having to brush it away. It's no big deal. No sweat off my back, you know what I'm saying? I really do love this shadow, and as you can probably see, there's a pretty big dip in the shadow itself because he is very, very well loved. So now we're moving out of the corals, so people who watch my videos often, sorry you had to go through that yet again. But the next shade I am talking about here is Colourpop's For Sure. This is a very bright and intense, warm, hot pink. It's a very strong pinky shade, and it is a pressed pigment, so you do get a lot of pigment at once you put it onto your eyelid, but there's not a lot of fallout with the shade, and I think it performs really nicely. It's very, very bright and intense and in your face, and I can really appreciate that, because if you're gonna buy a hot pink, chances are you probably want it to be very out there and you want it to be very bright. That's why you're buying a hot pink shade. And I've come across some that have been very subpar. So this shade, For Sure by Colourpop, does not disappoint. The next shade that I have to talk about here is Amour by Clionadh Cosmetics. This shade is described as a trichrome, and I believe it's a red and orange base, and then it shifts to an orange, pink, and a gold. So it's really, really beautiful. You can really see those colors in there, and I think that it's very reflective, and you can really see a lot of the different shifts of the colors when it's on your eyes. I've worn this many times, and I think it looks beautiful with red shadows. I think it looks great with pink shadows. I think it looks great with practically anything. I mean, maybe you couldn't pair it with the blue, but I definitely think you could pair it with a lot of the tones that I have going on in this palette. Next up is Makeup Geek's RazzleBerry. Now, this shade scared me off at first because it is a matte with some golden glitter throughout the shadow. And I am a self-proclaimed hater, if you will, when it comes to mattes with sparkle in them. But I will say that I kind of had to eat my words because this shadow is actually really beautiful. Now I will say, once you actually get it onto the eyes and start blending it, there's no sparkle in there, okay? All the sparkle just kind of transfers down onto your cheeks. And I usually just take a makeup wipe and just wipe it away. I always take a makeup wipe with my eyeshadows anyway because I like to really kind of sharpen out the edge with a makeup wipe. And if you didn't already know, I don't wear foundation, so it's not really a big deal for me to have to kind of brush away the glitter fallout. It's not the most ideal thing in the world, don't get me wrong, but I definitely judged this shadow before I got to know it. And it's not good to judge things before you get to know them, because RazzleBerry really did become one of my absolute favorite shadows. My favorite way to wear this shadow is actually with some of my more yellowy tones. I like to kind of put a matte yellow through the crease and use some other different tones of yellow in my crease to really deepen everything up. And then I really like to just go straight in with RazzleBerry and give it kind of that pop of raspberry color, and I think it works really, really nicely with the yellow, and I think it really kind of gives you that lemonade-y, summery, pink lemonade vibes. RazzleBerry is a classic shade from the Makeup Geek line, and she actually took it away for a while, and it is back on the website now, so thank God she brought it back, because if she would have just retired this guy for good, I would have never discovered my love for it. And like I was saying earlier, I think that Poppy and RazzleBerry are some of Makeup Geek's best shades when it comes to their mattes. I think they're so vibrant, so beautiful, and I think these just blend amazingly, and I'm just a huge fan of both of these shades. So if you haven't tried Makeup Geek and you want to try some colorful shades, I think that these two might be your way to go. So the last shade in my more berry toned row here is the shade Hot Tamale by Coastal Scents. Now I'm sure you're thinking, really, Coastal Scents? Because Coastal Scents is known for having a lot of hit and miss eyeshadows. Now their shadows are anywhere from $1.95 to 95 cents depending on what time of year you get it. But this shade is actually really nice and really does work out for me well. It is a little bit less pigmented than, say, the Makeup Geek shades that I have in here and some of the other ones, but it's still really vibrant and punchy on the eyes once you build it up. You just have to apply a few layers, and there's not a whole lot of fallout with it. It's still pretty blendable. It's not the best out of all the ones that I have in here, but I think it's still a really nice eyeshadow, and it's so affordable. You just can't really go wrong with that price tag. Hot Tamale is an eyeshadow that I think is a hit when it comes to the Coastal Scents Hot Pots. So now we're going to be getting into some of the more purpley kind of berry tones, but I do have one more red to talk about before we transition over into the purple, and that is Devinah's Ilithya. Now this shade is a lot different than Devinah's Sura, which is right up here, even though they might look very similar. They're actually very, very different on the eyes. To me, Devinah's Ilithya is a lot more grungy, a lot more kind of, I don't want to say dirty, but it's a lot more kind of smoked looking. Ilithya is a red matte shade, but it's a lot deeper in tone than a typical primary red. It's also a lot more kind of burnt looking, if you will, and it has a little bit of depth to it, more so than a typical red primary eyeshadow would. So I think this shade is really nice for deepening up some of my coral looks. I think it's really nice for using with other reds, maybe some lighter toned reds or some oranges. Once you start packing on the pigment, you can actually get it pretty deep in color. So I typically use it as a deepening shade and use it in my outer V. But I still think it's an amazing eyeshadow, and it's still definitely a red color, and you can really see that on the eyes. It stands out amongst other reds that you might be using, and I really do enjoy it. So we have come across yet again another pressed pigment from Sydney Grace, and this is in the shade Golden Rose. So obviously earlier we had Golden Peach, and now we have Golden Rose. This shade is absolutely gorgeous, and I think this is one of their most well-known shades, and for good reason. This shade has a kind of deeper purpley pink base, and then it shifts to a really bright, beautiful, intense gold. And the shift is very, very prominent. You can really see it on the eyes, but it's not so much of a warm pink to me. It definitely has a bit of that purpley undertone in it, and it works absolutely beautifully as a lid shade. And the lasting power on the pressed pigments from Sydney Grace is really, really nice, and I don't get a lot of transfer when I'm using their pressed pigments. So now we have my only two purples to talk about, which makes me sad because I thought I had more single eyeshadows that are purple, but apparently I don't. Well, I do, but I don't think they're worthy enough to really be in this palette. But the first sad little shade down at the bottom here is the shade Wild Berry by Clionadh Cosmetics. Now, you can see pan on this shadow, but that doesn't mean that I've hit pan on it, because this shadow kind of just fell apart, and that was my own doing, unfortunately. When I was taking it out of the package, it basically slipped out of my hands and fell onto the floor and shattered and broke all my hopes and dreams and my heart as well. So I tried to kind of piece it back together, but what I've found from the Clionadh formulas as far as their mattes go is that if one happens to fall apart, it's not really going to come back together with rubbing alcohol. Some formulas definitely do, but the Clionadh formula just doesn't come back together the same way that, say, a Colourpop shadow would. Because if you put your finger into the actual shadow itself, it's very, very smooth, but you get a lot of pigment off of just one finger swatch. You get a lot of pigment up on the brush when you dip your brush into their shadows. So I think that they're pressed not as hard as some shadows are. So when you go to try and fix an eyeshadow that you just got in the mail, it doesn't really work out too well for you. So that's why I've hit pan on that shadow. I truly, really haven't, but it's still a beautiful shadow nonetheless. This shade is like grape soda to me. It's a little bit more cool toned than some of the other berries that I have, but it's definitely still a kind of grapey berry shade. It's a little bit lighter in tone as well. It might look a little bit deeper in the pan, but once you actually get it onto the eyes and get everything blended out, it's like a mid-toned grapey purple. So I don't really have a whole lot in my collection like this, and I was really excited to add this to my collection. And unfortunately I broke it, but it's still a great shadow nonetheless. And the last purple shadow that I have to talk about today is the shade right down here, which is called La Di Da by Looxi, and I have talked about this on my channel a couple times as well. This shade is a little bit deeper than Wild Berry by Clionadh, but it's still kind of in the same purple family. To me, this shadow is a warmer, deep grape shade. It's still got that very punchy grape color to it, but it's a bit warmer than Wild Berry, and it's definitely a lot deeper. It's still really beautiful on the eyes and still packs a really nice grapey purple punch. Now we're gonna move into my three Sugarpill shadows, and I know that you guys have probably heard of these before, but I'm gonna mention them because they're beautiful and people talk about them a lot for good reason. And I'm sorry that the pans are a different size than the other ones, but this is what I'm working with here. And makeup struggles, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, girl. So the first Sugarpill shadow that I have over here is Butter Cupcake. This is a staple in a Color Lovers eyeshadow collection. Butter Cupcake is a matte primary yellow. That's what I love about Sugarpill, is that they do matte primary colors, and they're all very bright and very true to color, and they just really do colorful shadows well when it comes to their mattes. And you can't get more yellow than this shade. I mean, look at that. That is Lemonade Neon Yellow. The next Sugarpill shade that I have to talk about down here is Flamepoint, and mine has been through hell and back, as you can see. It is a very primary, true colored orange. It's absolutely stunning. It is very pigmented, very colorful on the eyes, and it blends out really nicely. But let's face it, all of these Sugarpill shadows are going to have the same description because they're all very bright, very colorful, and they all blend out amazingly. And the last shadow that I have to talk about today is Sugarpill's Love Plus. This is a very, very popular red shade, and if you are a color lover such as myself, I'm sure that you've heard of it before and maybe you even own it. Love Plus is a beautiful primary red. It's probably the most primary red you can get. It's like tomato ketchup right here, but you can really kind of blend it out on your eyes to get a bit more of a softer red look. But once you actually build this up on your eyes, it is so impactful and so bright, and if you want a red smoky eye, this is your guy. You can literally do an entire smoky eye look out of just this color, and it will look absolutely stunning. So I'm a huge fan of the Sugarpill colorful shades, and these three are all really, really popular and well known amongst people who just love color like myself. So now that I have a hand cramp from holding that Z palette up for so long and I have talked you guys' ears off, that is going to be wrapping it up for me here today. I really hope that you enjoyed taking a look into all of my favorite single eyeshadows that are colorful in my collection, and I hope that this was helpful to you as well. And like I said, I will be doing a video like this on my more neutral toned eyeshadows, but let's face it, there's definitely still going to be some color in there. Just maybe not as bright as this, but there's definitely still going to be some color in there because your girl isn't really into neutrals. But I do have some that I'd like to show off because I have a lot in my collection that I think are worth talking about. I do hope that you consider subscribing if you have not already. I have all sorts of makeup goodness happening here on this channel, so if you are not already subscribed, I would love to see you hit that button down below. I hope you are having an absolutely amazing day wherever you are, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Bye!